I now call this meeting to order. I trust that your cell phones have all been placed on silent. At this time, we're going to ask Vice Chair Hill if she'd lead us in the pledge and invocation if she so desires.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Move the agenda, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, ma'am. We have no special presentations this afternoon. Could I have a motion on the minutes? All right, we have a motion on the minutes with a proper second. With no objections, the minutes will stand as they are recorded. Looking over this evening's agenda, Council, we have a couple of items on final reading that I trust are all in place. Any questions or comments on those? No first reading for this afternoon. Under resolutions, economic development, questions or comments? All right. Mayor's office has several items for your consideration. A couple of ARP dollar appropriations. Any questions or comments there? All right. Under Public Works, anything under Public Works? Councilman Ledford.
Mr. Chair, if we may go back to item G under the mayor's office.
Sure.
I did inquire a little bit about this to understand, and this will allow, I don't know if staff wants to expand on this or not, this will allow flexibility and I think reporting and meeting benchmarks, and this goes across multiple ARP allotments.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. All right. Seeing nothing else for this week's agenda, looking at next week's proposed agenda, which is a fairly light agenda. Anything under next week's proposed agenda that needs to be brought to our attention? Only one item under final or under first reading, and a couple of items under resolutions. Anything there? All right, moving to our purchase questions. I think we have, or purchase items rather, I think we have 3 purchase items for your consideration this afternoon. Any questions or comments concerning any of those? All right. Looking now under future considerations, looking ahead to our July the 9th meeting, and I will reiterate, we will not be meeting on July the 2nd. No meeting July the 2nd. So our next council meeting, well, we'll have one on the 25th, but in July, our first meeting will be July the 9th. Councilwoman Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Council, on future considerations, I just wanted to draw your attention to Section 8, Fire A1. This is the ordinance that I brought up during our zoning conversation a couple weeks ago that will allow us to opt into some enabling legislation that the state of Tennessee passed in its most recent session. It will allow us in Chattanooga to build 3-family dwellings and 4-family dwellings to international residential code, thereby saving thousands and thousands of dollars per unit of housing compared to the requirements for building with the international commercial code. Buildings will be limited to 5,000 square feet total. They still will have to have a 2-hour firewall protection, and so it's all within the ordinance that you'll see on the 9th on our agenda.
All right. Councilman Ledford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Under line item 10A, Parks, the resolution into the Trust for Public Land Agreement, I think that amount, if someone can help me from step, is 150,000. Is that correct? So that divided into 4 $37,500, is that what we should expect?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, you're welcome. All right, any other questions or comments under future considerations? All right, if not, we do not have any committee reports or department reports this afternoon, but we do have a report by Mr. Chris Hopkins on our fire and police pension fund. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon,
to see
Mr.
you.
Chairman. Thank you. Good to see you all again. It's nice to be back.
Yeah.
I do have a very brief presentation just to kind of cover some old ground, but it's good to remind ourselves of how this works. So let me just remind everyone that the Chattanooga Fire and Police Pension Fund was actually started in 1949, so it has a storied history. These are our permanent administrators that work for the pension fund, but we're a little bit unique in that we have 6 of the 8 trustees who are sworn officers. We have 3 police and 3 fire, in addition to myself as your representative, and Julia Bursch is the mayor's representative. So the structure is a little bit unique, works very well, and I thought I would just show you the mug shots, if you will, of our current trustees. As I mentioned, we have 3 firefighters and 3 police officers in addition to the 2 civilian appointees. And I cannot stress enough, and don't say this enough, how much time our sworn members of the Board of Trustees put into this job. The sworn members make the decisions as far as disabilities go. They review all of the records. They are also beneficiaries of the plan in addition to being fiduciaries. And as part of their responsibility, it includes fiduciary training and continuing education. So they put in a great deal of time and effort, and I don't take enough of an opportunity to thank them for that, and just for everyone to know publicly how much time and attention is devoted to that. The Board of Trustees has the responsibility essentially for operating the pension fund, and as I mentioned a moment ago, we all serve as fiduciaries on the plan, and we're required to get training and continuing education to remind us of what that responsibility entails. So again, my hat's off to all the sworn officers who dedicate so much time to this. Defined benefit plans, pension plans have some challenges, as I think we all know, and not the least of which is demographics. So this is just a quick chart to show you what's happened with life expectancies since 1960. The average life expectancy at birth in 1960 was about 70 years, and today it's closer to 77 or 78. You'll notice a slight dip there in life expectancy. That's the result of the COVID pandemic, but we're beginning to climb back up. So if on average we live 7 or 8 years longer on a defined benefit plan, you can see how much stress that puts on pension plans. And as a result of that, the blue line is the number of participants in the United States who are in traditional pension plans. Most of these now are municipal plans, either city plans or first responder, fire and police plans. Very few private companies have ongoing defined benefit plans. You can see what's happened. 401ks have taken over. And that's largely because of the demographic challenges. Now I think, are in general agreement that especially with our first responders who are not able to work as long, who tend to have shorter life expectancies because of the dangers in their job and the hazards they encounter, and that they cannot work long enough to accrue sufficient benefits in a 401k. So we feel a responsibility to support them with a defined benefit plan. So our job as trustees is to try to continue to fund that plan, and with the assistance of and generosity of the City Council, we're making great strides along that avenue. Now the graphics didn't show up for whatever reason. The graph here is showing you the ratio of active participants to retirees. So on the left-hand side, if you could read that invisible number up there, the ratio would be 0.9, which meant there were 0.9 retirees for every active. Today, you switch that over. We now have more inactives, more retired members of the plan than we do working. And you can see then that number has grown. This just goes back 10 years. So that you can see the challenge that presents to us. And this is a little bit of a sloppy graph, but if I'll just point out a couple of things. If you look at the dark blue line that has such a big decline, the big dip there, that's our actual investment experience in the plan going back to 2004. You may recall right around 2008, we had an interesting year during the great financial crisis, and the Fire and Police Pension Fund took a pretty substantial loss. We lost 31% in that one year. That was dramatic, and it's taken us quite some time to recover. In fact, we haven't yet. It's, as you well know, it's been a story of gradual recovery. So the blue line is the actual investment results, and as we know, investment results bounce up and down. They always do. The light blue line is the actuarial return. So what we do is we take those very dramatic swings and we average them out over a period of time. We smooth them. And back then, after the great financial crisis, City Council asked if the plan would go to a 10-year smoothing, which is what we did. If we just accounted for the big dips at a market value, then next year Council would be asked to make a gigantic contribution to the plan. But by smoothing it out, the intention was to regain that over time. So on that 10-year smoothing curve, you can see that the actuarial rate trends down. It was actually trending downward. That's partly a function of some investment decisions that were frankly underperforming. But what we did do is we managed to get through that 10-year period of time, and now we have gone to a 5-year smoothing. So, and that's what the state law requires. So we are in compliance with Tennessee state law. And then the purple line is our actual assumed rate of return. And it's difficult to read because it's such a small change, but it's a slowly declining line. In other words, our assumed rate of return that we use to make our actuarial contribution has been reduced. We've declined that steadily over the years. So I'll come back to that in a moment. The point of all of that to show you that we have not yet fully recovered from the financial crisis in 2008 for a couple of reasons. But we are, my message to you today is that we are well on our way to getting there. So let me show you our actual investment results for the last quarter, first quarter 2023, which ended March 31. If you look into just under Q1 23, the funds had a 4.7% rate of return, drop down one line, and subtract the fees. Our net return was 4.6 for the quarter. The average pension fund in the United States made 4.5. So our objective is to be in the top half as we go along. We certainly managed to do that for the quarter. And then if you forward all the way over to the right-hand column and look at our 5-year annualized returns, and actually probably should drop down to the net return, 7.8%. That's been our average annual return over the last 5 years. Since we hired our new pension consultants, we made some substantial changes to our investment portfolio. We reduced our average annual investment fees by about 50 basis points, a half a percentage point, which compounded over the 30 or 40-year horizon of the plan is very substantial. So made some great strides. That net rate of return of 7.8% is in excess of the assumed rate, which is 6.75 today. I know Councilman Ledford, if he hadn't asked yet, was going to ask where we stand on that. So we have actually reduced our assumed rate of return from 9% back in 1992 to 6.75. So just think about that for just a moment. If you assume that you're going to earn 9% net investment return year in and year out, it's not a very realistic assumption. Now, in the late 90s, it was easy to fall into the trap of thinking that would go on forever, towards the end of the tech boom before we hit the dot-com bust. So our assumed rate of return of 6.75 is in line with pension standards. It is slightly below the average nationally, and it is slightly below the TCRS assumed rate of return as well. So we are right in line. We have no intention at present time to revisit that anytime in the near future. We've gotten it down to 6.75. Council has had to help us with that by funding a greater contribution each year. So again, I want to thank City Council for that support in helping us get there. I will tell you that as of the end of the year, when we had our last valuation done, our funded status is now 56%, 56.1. So we're not there, but we were at 43. And we were on the, I guess you could say, the treasurer's watch list. So we are making great strides. We've increased that up from 53.8 just in 2022. This is the year-end 23 valuation. So making excellent progress. As a reminder, the 25% salary increases in 2022 for fire and police, which were well received, also set the pension fund back because that increases the future obligation since their final average salary is going to be higher. That pay increase cost us about 3 to 4% of our funded status. So if we were comparing apples to apples prior to the raise, we'd be in the neighborhood of 60% funded. Well on our way to our preliminary target, which is 70% by 2034. So that target is now 1 year closer than it was a year ago. 1 year closer actuarially, so we're making good progress there. Once we hit 70% funded, we can restore half of the COLA that we took away in 2014. Once we hit 80%, and our target there is 2040, we're right on target there, we return to a 3% COLA for fire and police. So making really, really excellent progress in my mind, thanks largely to City Council being so supportive of the plan along the way when times really were pretty tough. I'll just kind of close before I take questions with a couple of notes. Our administrators, Katrina Abbott and Christina, go out routinely to conduct continuing education and in-service training for the fire and police officers so that they understand their pension plan, they know how it works, they know the options. We just 2 weeks ago conducted a seminar in-house to explain any of the potential retirees how it all works and took questions. We engaged DeHobb and Associations out of Long Island as our consultant about 6 years ago, so they've done a tremendous job in guiding us in finding new managers and in reducing those investment fees substantially. And as a result of last year's progress, City Council's contribution to the plan actually was reduced for this coming fiscal year by about $124,000. So maybe not a lot, but incremental progress, and that's the message we tell all the time is big changes are probably not sustainable. Small, sustainable, regular changes, just chipping away, and that's what we've done, and I think over the last 5 years that has paid dividends. The last thing I will mention is that one of the issues on the table for us has been a marked increase in disability claims among fire and police. Actually, over 5 years, it's been almost a geometric increase. So if we project out, we see additional funding hurdles for the plan. So we have been engaged, very constructively engaged with police and fire unions to look at rolling back some of what we would consider overly generous partial disabilities that are not available to TCRS participants who are public servants and first responders. So we've engaged very constructively with the fire union in particular. We're very close to a consensus on what kind of modifications we can make to help strengthen the fund, provide its long-term stability without negatively impacting the really critical disability requirements, which is a permanent and total disability that has not changed. And so, as I said, Lieutenant Joe Shaw, our board president, has been working closely with the fire unions and the police unions and leadership of both departments in what I consider one of the most constructive collaborations I've seen in the 6 years I've been doing this between all of the players. So kudos to Joe, Lieutenant Shaw. And at that, I will ask if anyone has any questions.
I think we do. Councilman Ledford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris, thank you. And let me echo the appreciation to our trustees and our sworn officers for the job they do. And if you'll allow me, Chris, let me add on top of special thanks to you as well. You deserve a raise if you were to get paid.
I'll take 5% over what I'm making.
I follow you on the radio. I follow you in the newspaper. I follow you personally, as you know, and I think when Councilman Smith brought your name forward several years ago to lead this, I had no idea how incredible an asset you were on helping lead this, and now the evidence is before us. So thank you.
Well, you're very kind, thank
My
you.
question is, and thank you for the actuarial rate, I was going to ask about that. And I'm glad that we're keeping it there, not thinking about moving it. I think that's wise, and I know you and I have sat in my office and talked about this at length as well. Can you talk a little bit more about the strength in the equity market versus the static returns that you put in your report in the bonds, and is that linked to specifically the current interest rates? Or I'm hoping I'm hitting on some cylinders. 'Cause I really
Absolutely.
do
If we go
follow you.
back to 2022, you can see from our performance chart, 22 was a down year. We were down about 12%. The equity markets were down, give or take 20%. Bond market was down 13. So part of our portfolio is in bonds. Part of it is in what we consider real assets, timber, farmland, some longer term things that we consider safe assets, but are not as interest rate sensitive. So everybody got clobbered in 22. Personally, we all probably felt that. Equity market returns have been very strong in 23 and so far in 24. Bond market returns have been negative or flat, and that is entirely a function of interest rates. As you probably remember, the Fed raised rates from 0 to 5.5%, and they've been holding it there.
Yep.
My expectation is maybe one rate cut later this year, but even that is up in the air. So the backside of a rate cycle is when bonds really perform well. As interest rates come down, you'll see bond values appreciate, plus you have a locked-in interest rate that now looks very attractive when rates start to fall. So the answer to your question is yes. Equities have been very strong. I will even add that our equity portfolio is probably not matching the headline equity numbers because, as you may know, about 6 or 7 stocks have been responsible for 60% of all the S&P 500 gains in the last year. That notwithstanding, you can name the names, NVIDIA and Microsoft and so forth. That notwithstanding, our equity returns have been quite good. And over the last 5 years, if I can go back to my other chart here, that top line, this is gross of fees, that 8.3%, puts us in the top 39%. So 61% of all pension funds performed worse than we did. So I hope that answers your question.
It really does, and firms up my confidence in your leadership. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you,
Very
Mr.
kind.
Chair.
Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chris, I appreciate your presentation and the work that you and the trustees do. I am concerned about slide 7. The copy that you sent to us has more details on it than the slide we see on the screen.
Yes.
So given the fact that in 2023, we moved to an upside-down ratio of workers to retirees, help me understand how you're projecting out what that's going to look like in 3 years. You know, we continue to struggle with adequately or fully staffing to our budget, our first responders, both fire and police. And so how long are we going to be upside down in that, do we anticipate? And how does that work into your 2040?
So it's a great question, and I didn't have enough time to present all the details. So right to your question, every year we do a significant valuation of the plan as of 12/31. Some of these numbers are based on that, including this one. In that valuation, which is done by Siegel, an actuary, they build in some assumptions of that demographic shift. And to be quite honest with you, we don't anticipate that upside-down ratio is going to change anytime in the really immediate future. If you back up a little bit and think about it from a demographic standpoint, the baby boom generation was the biggest, and they're either retired or right on the cusp of it. And next comes Gen X, was the smallest demographic generation. So unfortunately, Gen X is going to have to pay the bills for me. But coming behind that, the millennial generation is the largest demographic bubble, bigger than the baby boomers. So ultimately, in the long term, and of course in pension land we think long term, we're talking 30, 40 years, that situation corrects itself to some degree. Now, the fire and police have been understaffed, and the wage increases have certainly helped with recruiting. That's a longer term project, but the honest answer is we've built in these assumptions for the foreseeable future, certainly the next 10 years. We don't expect that ratio to turn, but we plan for it. So when we come to you each year with a proposal for funding the pension, it includes the demographic assumptions of retirees versus new hires and the ratio between the two.
Well, and to that point, the performance of the plan impacts the amount of the city general fund money that needs to go into the pension plan, but also the amount of how upside down we get and for how long. So if we're looking at 10 years that we expect to be upside down with actives versus inactives, workers versus retirees,
Yep.
what are you expecting that ratio to go to? What's our worst ratio going to be? Do you know?
Well, I would say that we are probably more or less in a stasis at this point. I don't expect it to go to 115. We could bounce around between 103 or 104 where we are now and 108 maybe
Okay, okay.
at the margins. I don't anticipate a big change in that.
Okay.
Now, that just like so many other things, when you talk about demographics, that, not to digress too much, but when they invented the statin drug, it increased life expectancy by 3 years, and that bankrupted some public pension plans. So we're building that into our consideration, but if there was a sudden cure for for cancer or whatever it is that dramatically extends life expectancy, we can't plan for that. But just based on our fundamental assumptions, I'd say we're close to the top, maybe another couple hundred percentage points, maybe.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all, Chair.
All right. Chris, I do want to thank you for your set of eyes on this. This is something that can sink a ship if it's not watched very closely, as you just alluded to. And I want to thank you for your diligence. Is the target of 70% funded in 2034, does that assume any increase in contribution from the city?
No, I will say, well, let me say, it doesn't assume any substantial increase in the contribution, but the contribution each year is based on experience from the prior 5 years, because we smooth it, and any demographic assumptions. For example, if we changed our mind next year and decided that ratio is going to 10, it would factor into the computation, but it
Okay.
does not include a ramping up of city council's
But right now,
contribution.
the 70% by 2030 or 2034 doesn't assume, I guess, any major shift or
No,
contribution.
it assumes that we keep doing what we've been doing in the same manner we've been doing
Okay,
it.
okay.
Yep.
All right.
That's a very good question. And one other thing I'll mention, that we were on the treasurer's list. I stay in touch with David Lillard and reported back to him about a month ago, and he's pretty pleased with the progress that Chattanooga's made along these lines. We're off the watch list.
Okay. All right, any other questions for Chris at this time? Chris, thanks so much for being here.
Well, and on
This
behalf of
report.
all the trustees and all the first responders, thank you. City Council has always, I've reviewed the historical records, they've always risen to the challenge when funding was difficult and kept the fund afloat, and there's a lot of reasons that we need to maintain our independence and not roll into TCRS.
Yep, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Councilwoman Noel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you might allow me to go back and revisit Parks and Outdoors, letter N.
Is for tonight's agenda?
Yes. If Eric and or Scott can come up and,
Well, let's get Scott up first, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Councilmember. We've got some slides, if we could pull those up. Great. It's my pleasure to give you all a briefing. I promise to be brief here on an interesting partnership we're bringing to you with the full endorsement of the Parks and Outdoors Committee on a new approach to planning parks in our community. And that involves a partnership with the Chattanooga Design Studio. So I'll have Eric join me in a second. Let's use the clicker here. The big takeaway, of course, is write the plan, work the plan. So our deal is to go as quickly as we can to work on what council directed us to do, which is build a world-class park system. The first piece of this is going to be Montague Park, which you're familiar with the plans that we unveiled last year. And we're quickly accelerating that as fast as we can into a construction design. And we're doing so with a great number of partners that we'll speak about, some of which you see recognized on this map in front of you that connect and bring the neighborhoods into relationship with this. Hard stop on one point. This park is our largest urban park in the valley. It's 47 acres. And we're not going to get it back. So we've got to make sure this design works well, not only today, but going forward as well when we're a city of 175,000, 300,000 people. So it's really important to us that we get this done right in a way that honors the neighborhood of today and helps shape the neighborhoods that are to come around it. Underway right now, and the reason I wanted to bring this image up, we have 2 leases. One is to Sculpture Fields and the other is to the Chattanooga Football Club. And by working with the Chattanooga Football Club Foundation, they're serving a lot of new Americans, young families, and the folks that really depend upon soccer to ground themselves and be the moments when they come together. Crew and his team are just an extraordinary group of city leaders, and I'm highlighting it on the big screen here, but the field on your right is going through design permitting right now, and it'll be the first part of this project that they're looking to break ground on within probably the next month and get that activated and bring the joy of sports to the community. And with that, as the first phase, the plan that I'm going to bring forward to you now, ask Eric step up here and join, is how we take this plan and begin to advance it into the design process. So Eric.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Council. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure and an honor to partner with Parks and Outdoors Department in the City of Chattanooga to advance such a really once-in-a-generation project in Chattanooga, and one that will have a lasting effect for everyone in Chattanooga. Because I think, as Scott mentioned, this park lies in the heart of the city. When you look at how centrally located the park is, it's so important to so many Chattanoogans. And so I think you may think of the vision plan that we shared with you last year, and thank you for having the time to do that, as phase 1 of really how this partnership moves forward. The vision plan has a great conceptual framework right now that we can carry forward, and we need to carry forward in this process with this team in a very deliberate way through a much more detailed design process. And so we need to bring in the parts of the process that we call schematic design and design development, so that this team can investigate more about the conceptual design and advance a lot of the conceptual ideas to come through fruition. So you might sit there and say, well, what does a design like this and funding at this level of a design like this do? It gets us to a point that we can talk about real numbers and much more real construction dollar values with you. We have a conceptual budget right now to match the conceptual plan. It gets us in a place where we can talk more with the departments of the city about stormwater benefits, water quality benefits, and how the brownfield can be healed, and what are the benefits of planting trees on the site, and how do we do that long term, and how does all of the infrastructural components of the park work cohesively in a cohesive manner. So this is the team that we propose. We propose carrying forward the conceptual framework team, which is led by Reed Hildebrand, and their team, as you can see here, which has local architecture firm HK Architects, CMTA, which is the mechanical, electrical, plumbing team that'll be doing the design for the pavilion structures that you've seen along Polk Street that was shared with you. Hillworks, who was actually here yesterday, looking at test pits in Montague Park, and so looking at the geotechnical and environmental concerns that are at the park, and treating those in a delicate manner. They'll also be doing horticultural design, so leaning in with Reed Hildebrand to look at very, very detailed plant selections with Parks and Outdoors Department. Shearwood's the design engineers out of Atlanta, and their expertise brings forward the stormwater and the civil engineering that's necessary to work in the flood-prone zone that we have here that we're working in. And Studio Ludo is an international play consultant, and so they'll be working in the heart that you might remember, the all-ages play area in the center of the park that we presented to you last fall. This may be very difficult to read. Hopefully you can see it on your screen. This is the schedule of the work, which begins now and would last until March of next year. And so you can see it's quite an extensive level involvement, and so the retail brand will have 3 site visits, and so it's important here to pause and know that we're going to continue the input loop that we've had with the community and with the public during this dialogue process, and so we'll continue to be on site and meeting people where they are to talk about the park, to share new ideas, to share the advancement of the design, and to get input and put that into the design process. So you can see that really on the bottom of this slide in the timeline. And then we'll be working with both Sculpture Fields and CFC and for the advancement of the 2 major components and the leaseholders in the park, as well as all of the surrounding partners that you saw on that first slide that Scott shared. So I'm really excited to do this. We're really honored, Chattanooga Design Studio, I can say this on behalf of the staff and board, we're really honored to be a partner in this way, and we're going to bring our best, and you can count on us to do everything that we do at the highest quality level, whether it's meeting and listening to the community or advancing our design ideas with the highest quality urban design.
Whoop, live one. And then it doesn't stop there. The agreement in front of you brings Chattanooga Design Studio into a lead design role for us for a variety of projects. The next one up is Carver Park. This is one of our most historic parks. If you don't know, it was a 9-hole golf course for a long time in its existence. It has transitioned to a community park, and it's touching, fix, build, preserve, and connect in a critical part of our neighborhood. Again, probably our largest community park in our urban core as well. We need a very strong and thoughtful way to approach this site for redesign because it's going to be asked to do a lot. We heard things like a senior center. We hear things like Head Start. We have new FEMA maps that are showing us flooding there is going to increase. There's a lot of technical detail along with the neighborhood input to design a park that serves the people who live near the park. So we're going to ask the Chattanooga Design Studio to build on their work that they've done across the community, engage with listening first before we put any pen on paper to make sure that we have a community-led, community-shaped, and authentically grounded new park plan for Carver to allow that park to evolve forward and be re-envisioned as well. And we've spoke briefly with Councilmember Noel about this. This is far earlier in the process than Montague, but I wanted to give you an idea of that. And then finally, the work doesn't stop there. By having this relationship with the Chattanooga Design Studio as our design shop in-house, they're going to work on a variety of projects across the city, everything from the new sports fields, if the budget is passed, at John A. Patton, to helping the folks at the Heritage Playground, the accessible playground going on, and how we shape the planting plan around that, to Carruthers Park, how do we activate that park and bring perhaps sports and soccer and different amenities there. So it gives us an architect and a landscape designer in-house by having this relationship that we haven't had before, and we're mimicking what we do with the Trust for Public Lands. If you recall, we partner with them to provide us with conservation services for conservation finance, land acquisition, negotiations, and partnerships. This allows us to do that now in the design space as well. So thank you for asking for a little bit more fleshed out detail, and I'm happy to take any questions council has.
Councilman Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Scott, can you slowly back up, particularly to the timeline of Montague? Yeah, oh, right there. All right, so it's about 9 months, a little over 9 months. At the very end of this, in March is what I'm seeing here, where visit is the last item. What exactly will we have accomplished in this amount of time? What will we have?
What do we get at the end of it? Yep, can I go back a couple more with your patience? Okay, we're gonna get 50% design drawings, but let me ground that out for what it really means. This site is incredibly complex because it is a landfill. It has a lot of stormwater management. It has sculptural art that we want to preserve and protect in soccer. And while we have a master plan that shows how it works, the truth of the matter is you've got to get into this detail to understand, if I move dirt over here, how does that impact dirt over here? If I move 3 sports fields here, what does that do to parking over here? At the end of the 50%, we'll have answers to those questions, and I'm going to use the P word that I hate, but I'm going to use it. It'll give us an actionable, responsible phasing process that we can bring forward to construction. So instead of ready, fire, aim, we'll have a process with real dollars assigned to it that allow us to make process in a rational, predictable way.
Okay, so plan. Just out of curiosity, who put this deck together?
I did.
Can you go advance one?
Sure.
You want to tell me what's wrong with that slide?
I know you're going to say it says soccer fields, I'm guessing.
I've also heard you say that.
Yeah, they're going to,
Can we start changing that mindset?
I can to a degree, but we need to be in full candor here. This land was leased out by the city to CFC Foundation. And they're great partners and will allow for many sports to be used, and they're great letting rugby and everyone else in. The lease is with the Chattanooga Football Club Foundation, with the primary program delivery there being soccer, which is their mission. They serve rugby, they'll work with anybody, but this is actually an appropriate title for the lease agreement we have in place.
I would like to dig into that a little bit deeper because the resolution that we passed specifies the other sports, so I don't know that I agree with that.
Sure, be happy to.
Might want to do that. Because if the lease agreement is not in line with the intent of the resolution that this council passed, then we got a problem with the lease agreement, not with.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll check on that for
I
sure.
would very much appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Dotley.
I was just gonna ask for a copy of this if it hasn't already been sent. Okay, thank you. That's it?
All right. Councilwoman No.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Councilman Smith touched on a little bit of my question. So my issue with not an issue, my concern is that this part has to be all-inclusive. That it does not need to seem like it's a private park. It has to include everyone should have access to it here in the city. So that's something that we need to focus in on, and definitely the community involvement in it.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Could not agree with you more.
okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Martin. Not seeing any at this time. All right, council, we do need an attorney-client privilege meeting following our recess, and we will take a short recess until 4:30 this afternoon, so we will reconvene at 4:30.